Okay, with all the equation solving we've been doing, this is going to be pretty easy. So, for our first video of Algebra 2, Unit 3, Day 5, this is the first of two videos, I'll go ahead and say. Um, that's all this is about, is solving cube root equations. Um, very, very simple concept, forwards and backwards. And I'll probably only do these first, let's say, these first three examples, and then I will go ahead and also show you um, a cube, a cubic equation example, just because I kind of left that off of here now that I'm looking at it. Anyway, so let's look at these first three, and then we'll talk about cubic equations as well. So right here we've got the cube root of x is equal to 2. So obviously I would want to do the inverse of the cube root of x, which is to cube both sides. So that's going to be x is equal to 2 to the third power, which of course we know is 8. So that just means our answer is 8. And of course, if we plug back in, the cube root of 8 obviously is 2. Okay, so coming back. Okay, so 2 times the cube root of 16x equals 8. So we want to get the cube root expression by itself, just like how we have been doing in the past. Um, get the radical expression or the absolute value expression by itself first. Then from there, we isolate further. So we're going to divide by 2 on both sides. So we now have the cube root of 16x is equal to 4. Then we cube both sides, right? So that's going to become 16x equals 64. And that's because if we raise 4 to the third power, that of course is going to give me 64. Then we just divide by 16, and thus x is 4. And if we throw that back in here, uh, and say that 4 is equal to x, well, we get the cube root of 64 times 2. The cube root of 64 is 4. 4 times 2 is, in fact, 8. Okay, so we know we've done this correctly. One last example, and then we'll get into some cube cubic equations that we'll solve. So same idea, we're going to get this radical expression by itself. So I'm going to subtract 1, divide by -3, and I'm going to cube both sides. Now we have to be careful here. If I'm cubing both sides, right, we have to be careful with the signs, right? So -2 times -2 times -2. So -2 times -2 is +4, but +4 times -2 is -8. So we have x plus 2 is equal to -8. Subtract 2 from both sides, and thus x is equal to -10. Okay, and we chuck that back in here. -10 plus 2 is -8. The cube root of -8 would be -2 times -3 would be +6. +6 plus 1, of course, gives me 7. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's briefly look at some examples. Hopefully, I can come up with some good ones just here on the spot. Look at some examples of cubic equations. I'm going to have to throw that into the actual lesson. Can't believe I didn't catch that. Okay, so some cubic equations. Let's say I had 4 times x to the third power is equal to, let me think of how this could work out. I don't know. I'm just going to say 64. Well, no, not 64. We'll just say 40. Okay, so this is my own fault for not having examples prepared. And actually, let's not even do that. Let's start out with a really simple baby example. So x to the third power is equal to 27. Okay, well, we're going to do the inverse of cubing, which we know is to take the cube root of both sides. Oops, not 37. And we, of course, know the cube root of 27 is going to be equal to 3. So this means that x is 3. And the reason for that, well, is because 3 to the third power does, in fact, give us 27. Okay, so now let's look at something a little more complicated. And this is really going to test my creativity here to just come up with it on the spot. Let's say 2x to the third power is equal to 16. Okay, so right here, all we're trying to do is get the cubed expression by itself. I mean, not really rocket science here. We divide by 2, take the cube root, and we have our answer. Right? And I mean, you can imagine how much more complicated that these can get, but ultimately it comes down to using inverse operations from the outside in or doing PEMDAS, uh, the inverse of PEMDAS. So doing that in reverse, either way to ultimately isolate quote unquote X to solve these. Nothing really changes in comparison to everything that we've been doing so far. This is kind of a joke. Okay. So simple stuff, but all the same, shoot me an email or you know where to come and find me if you have any questions. Goodbye.